Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. As you probably know, March is Women's History Month, and we're going to be having a discussion today amongst women who are breaking barriers in the baseball and media world and talk about our experiences, all things baseball and media. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Taylor McGregor. I'm a field reporter and host for Marquee Sports Network.
Hey, everybody, I'm Beth Mowins, and I'm going to be filling in for select games on play-by-play this year on the Marquee Network for Cubs games.
Hi, everyone. I am Rachel Folden. I am a minor league hitting coach for the Chicago Cubs, and I will be in Mesa, Arizona with rookie ball this year. So pretty excited.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Schneider. I am the Senior Vice President of Technical Operations for Marquee Sports Network, overseeing the facilities and operations here in our control room studios, as well as our live operations.
Awesome panel that we got here today. I'm assuming all of us at one point or another have been asked, what is it like being a female in a male-dominated industry? And so, Beth, let's start with you as somebody who was the first woman to call a nationally televised NFL game. You'll be the first woman to call play-by-play for the Chicago Cubs. What is it like for you to be a woman in such a male-dominated role?
Well, what I've discovered over the years, and it started at a very young age, is I've been pretty comfortable in that role, and I've come to appreciate that a lot of other people may look at me a little differently, but I still look at myself the same way. And when you grow up with a dad who's a coach and a basketball coach, and so I lived in the gym where I was usually the only little girl running around, and three brothers in the house, you grew up in a sort of situation where it was all about proving yourself. And that's the great thing about sports, right, is it doesn't matter. I consider sort of what we all do as a glorified pickup game. And as long as you can prove you're worthy, as long as you can carve out a niche for yourself, as long as everybody else wants you to be on their team because you provide something really good for the whole group, then you're going to fit in. And so I think I've been fortunate to be comfortable in what would usually be uncomfortable situations. And probably that's the first thing for any woman in a male-dominated field. You've got to feel good in your own shoes.
Yeah, Rachel, I assume for you, a lot of it draws upon confidence, because I read a quote of yours saying that you don't really think about the significance of being the first woman hired by the Chicago Cubs and one of only 4 women who currently hold a job as a coach in Major League Baseball. But how do you view being a female in the role that you hold?
Like Beth was saying, the sports world is very merit based, and I think that's what's always drawn us to the field and to begin with. Is if you can play, you can play, right? And that's always how it's been. But as far as getting this position, understanding the significance that it holds just from a visibility standpoint is now there are women on the field, and so now people can see it, just like people can hear Beth's voice. It's like that part of it, I'm very aware of. I'm very aware of the significance and the impact. And, there's a lot riding on the fact that we have to be good at our jobs, and we have to be able to, take this position and have people proud that they hired us into this position. And I think I don't take that lightly. I'm very proud to have this position just because of the significance that it holds. But as far as on the field stuff, it's just baseball, it's just playing. It's understanding the sport and competing and trying to win. And that's genderless, in my opinion.
Yeah, and TV is a lot like that too. You have to perform, because when the red light goes on, everything has to be working. And Deb Schneider, as much about that as anybody, because you have to make sure everything is working behind the scenes. And for people who aren't aware of what the production side of TV is like, there are not a lot of women who hold those roles. And so, Deb, for you, I'm curious, what is it like being a woman in your role?
As I sort of have grown up in the industry, I don't think I really thought about being the only woman. I think it was more about trying to stick to the work and come up with the right solutions, and to prove myself that, I was able to sort of overcome whatever the challenge of the day was. As a woman in this industry, I just kept on saying yes, and kept it about the work. And if you stick to the work and you let the work speak for itself, I think it's a much easier path, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I always say I feel like I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, women like Beth, who've come before me to set the tone for women in the industry, because I felt like, as I grow into my profession, there's a lot of women around me, or at least way more than there used to be. And so I'm so thankful for that. And I think that brings up the point of representation. And Beth and Rachel, I think you both mentioned that of, it's important for people, women, to be in the roles that we're in, so that other girls can look at us and say, oh, okay, I can do that. And so my question, Beth, I'm curious, when it comes to baseball in particular, as you're the first Cubs TV play-by-play and one of the very few women to call Major League Baseball, how do you think the game of baseball can grow with representation and kind of create a role for everybody?
Well, I think it's not only something that's going on in the booth right now, but it's going on around the entirety of the sport, and a lot of the rules changes that they're going to experiment with in the minor leagues. We continue to evolve as a society. It keeps getting faster and faster, and it keeps getting more diverse. So, I think the estimates that I've read, it's about 45% of the MLB audience is female. And so there is definitely something to it. What research has shown is it is nice for women watching the game to know that there are women involved. And so that helps you feel a little bit more involved and be a part of the team, if you will, as well. So I think the diversity and getting more and more types of people involved in the game also helps spread the entertainment value of it, and the tweaks that we make and the adjustments that we make to try and make it a much more enjoyable experience benefits everybody.
Yeah, and Rachel, I think what's so cool with your position, you were the first woman to hold a coaching role with the Cubs, but you're not going to be the last. And I think that's what is encouraging about the way that our society is evolving, as Beth mentioned. And so for you, having now been through a little bit of the steps to make yourself acclimated in this baseball world, what more can be done to create more ways for women to get involved?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of meeting the other women that have been hired, Rachel Balkovec being one of them. And she made a really good point. And it was, we don't need necessarily more women working in baseball. We need more qualified people working in baseball, and we need women to be qualified for those positions. And I think expressing interest from a female perspective of wanting to work in baseball is the first step. It's very easy for us to go around and say, you should hire a woman, you should hire a woman, you should hire a woman. But if those women are not qualified to hold those positions, it actually sets us back, because now we're hiring people that weren't qualified for the position in the first place. And so, we just need to, again, this visibility aspect helps a ton, because now it's like, oh, I never thought about working in baseball. Maybe I should, try to, turn my sights that way. I've always been a baseball fan. For me, I've always been a baseball fan, but I always got pushed to softball because that was the sport that they gave to us, right? But I've always been a baseball fan. So when the opportunity presented itself to work in baseball, I was like, oh, I guess I never thought of that before, but I should really pursue that. And so I think getting more women interested in the game to begin with, cultivating those, from being fans as kids, and cultivating those relationships all the way up to maybe wanting to play baseball, coach in baseball, work in the front office, anything like that. I think that's where we have to set our sights on bringing more women into the game. And I don't necessarily think it's just by saying we need to hire more women. That's the easy way. But the actual way that it's going to change is by more women being interested in baseball to begin with. And I think, turning on a Cubs game and hearing Beth's voice is a great step for that kind of thing. Turning on a game and seeing a woman in a uniform is a great step for that, to say, oh, I guess I never thought of that, but I want to do that. That looks cool.
If I can just
go ahead, Beth.
Add on to that, and something that Deb referred to as well, you can't be a wallflower. And it, when I was younger, I was actually a little shy around people that I didn't know. And so that's something that I had to work on, a skill that I had to develop a little bit better. And for all of us on this panel, and really for anything you want to do in life, the opportunities don't come knocking on your door. You've got to go open those doors, and you've got to want it, and you've got to chase it. And I think that is something that a lot of little girls aren't accustomed to, especially if they're not playing sports. So that's something that you have to learn, again, to feel comfortable in what might be uncomfortable situations, and recognize early on what some of your weaknesses are, and then work on them to make them strengths.
Yeah, and I think
you guys made
Taylor.
Go ahead, Deb.
Sure. Just one thing that I would like to add too is I think we all come at this from our own perspective, right? A little bit, and I think the other thing we need to do is educate young women about the sometimes less obvious opportunities out there in sports, right? So, what are the jobs out there that they don't even know about? The operations manager positions, the production manager, the things that don't necessarily get highlighted in sports, but are still very rewarding and great paths to try, and a way to be associated with the game, and a way to stay and keep sports alive within yourself. I think one of the hardest things for me was, I played sports my whole life, and then you sort of get out of college and you get a job and you have a family, and somehow you can lose sight of that. And it's a way to stay connected and to keep that thought within people's minds of stay connected to sports, because there are so many valuable things that come from it.
Absolutely. And one of the things I liked that Rachel said was qualification, people who are qualified, developing that. And of course, all of you are qualified for the jobs that you hold. And so my question to each one of you, and Deb, we'll start with you. What do you think you did that set yourself up for success in the role that you're in right now?
I think over time, right, you expose yourself to different things. And I think for me over time, it was just learning the value of being part of a team, that the value of, it's such a sweeter victory when you've reached it with a group of folks that you have a common bond with. And to start to, I think the way I approach my job is from a very collaborative, positive mindset that says, there's nothing we can't figure out together. Production is going to continue to throw challenges at us. We want to do, number various things and to improve the broadcast. And I love the part of it where we sit down with the engineers and with the producers, and we all put our heads together and figure out how we're going to do it. I think the pandemic was a perfect example of that. We had all kinds of challenges. All of a sudden, everybody had to be from their house. And, to dive in and do that, I think was something that I'm very proud of, and something that I learned a great deal from. And that, there isn't anything you can't achieve if you really put your mind to it and make sure you're working with all the right people and pulling the right people together.
I think for me, there's so many things that we could point to as far as work ethic and, putting your best foot forward and making sure you're prepared for the broadcast. And I think something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, and when you talk about the team atmosphere, is being able to be the person that people want to work with, because especially in TV, this is your family. And during baseball, you spend so much time with a group of people. And so, I think all of us, we're motivated people, we're highly driven, we're probably really competitive. I know I am, but being able to be a member of a team and build each other up and be kind to one another, that's I think something that doesn't get talked about enough, to have longevity in a business like this. And it's something that I feel like I see in all of you, and something that I think people, who are coming up through the business, that's such an important part, is being somebody that people want to work with and who people like because they're kind and they challenge each other and they push each other to do the right thing. So that's kind of my experience as far as ways that I've found to be successful in the business. Beth, what about you?
Well, I'll cross over my sports here for a second. And I always like to say that my parents raised a point guard. And I think sort of what you were speaking of, that point guard mentality of sort of embracing a leadership role, embracing responsibility. What I like to say, you need to be a little Jimmy Chitwood and a little Jimmy Chew. And if you remember the movie Hoosiers, Jimmy Chitwood wanted the ball, but he just quietly went about his business, a lot of hard work behind the scenes. And he wanted the responsibility at the end of the game. And then a little Jimmy Chew, because, we do work in an audio visual industry, and it's very subjective. And so how you look and how you sound are important to your bosses. But I think more importantly, to how you feel about yourself. And you know what? If I haven't worked out in a couple of days, I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit blah right now. I need to get going again. And if I know I'm looking my best and I'm out there being a good teammate and wanting, to distribute the ball and to help everybody around me get better, I feel like that's a pretty good day at the office. And to bring the kind of joy, to bring the kind of Ernie Banks joy to every TV show is kind of something to strive for.
And Rachel, what about you? Because you actually work on a legitimate team. How have you found success, and how have you gotten yourself qualified for the role that you hold now?
I mean, to get my foot in the door, it kind of goes back to what Deb was saying. Like, I asked, I asked. I was originally brought on as part of, there's a company called Elite Baseball in Chicago, and they wanted to bring me in to overhaul their softball part of their business. And I immediately just said, well, if I'm going to do this, I want my foot in the door on the baseball side too. I just asked, and it was met with okay, sure. You can come and learn everything you need to know about baseball. That's fine too. And, because I think what usually happens, especially with women's sports, is, the men get like all the tech, all the money, everything. And then it kind of trickles down to the female sports. And there's very few female sports where, it's a very level playing field. And so I immediately was like, well, if I'm going to work on the softball side, I want to have, the cream of the crop. I want to have access to everything. And so at that point in my career, it was all the technology and all of the data collection and everything like that. And so because I asked, and because I was, forward on, expressing what I wanted to have happen, I got exposed to some really cool people and some very smart people. And then I learned a lot, and it just completely like transformed me as a coach. And so then all of a sudden, the president of that company is now the director of hitting for the Chicago Cubs. So when he had to hire coaches, I suddenly was very well qualified for a job because I knew how to do everything. I knew the tech side. I've been coaching since I was in college, honestly. And, I had a good mix of blending those two. So I was well qualified for the position, but had I never asked for that opportunity, I probably wouldn't have ever gotten it. And so I think, that was the biggest pivot and turning point in my career was just asking, like saying, hey, I want to do that. Expressing interest, kind of going along with what I was saying earlier. So that was how I got in there. But I completely agree with you, Taylor, with likability. I write letters of recommendations for my girls that I coach all of the time. And my favorite thing to write on a letter of rec is when someone is likable. Like, because I'm going to, not only do I have to work with you, but I also I'm going to hang out with you. I'm going to see you outside of work. And I'm going to, there has to be that likability there. And so, it can't be, someone, especially in a female position like us, where we go in and we just expect everybody to treat us differently. And we have this guard up, we have to kind of let our guard down and say, I'm assuming that everything is going to be just fine. And we're all rowing our boat in the same direction. And I think that likability takes us a long way for sure.
For sure. And Rachel, I could talk to you for 500 hours about what you do with the Pitch Lab, because I think it's so fascinating. And so you're just getting started now. And so my question for you are, what are your goals and aspirations as you step in and build your career?
Well, it's the Hit Lab for me. I don't want anything to do with pitching. I hate pitchers.
Okay.
They scare me. I don't want to hit anything that has to do with a slider or a fastball or anything like that. I get this question all the time. I haven't had a chance to work a full season yet, so I don't know. I as of right now, I never want to leave the batting cage. So as long as I get to be in a batting cage every day, I'm happy. That's where, just you have some really awesome, like, connecting conversations with players. You see them at their highest of highs, their lowest of lows. I like to say that I'm in the people business, and sports is just my medium for getting to work with people, because I just love connecting with people. And so I'm in favor of anything that gets me in the cage right now. That could change over the years. I don't know. Ask me after I've spent, in a polyester uniform in the middle of Arizona for an entire year, and that might change. I don't know. But I'm really excited to get started. So let me get a full season under my belt, and I'll let you know.
So we can clarify then that you had nothing to do with Kyle Hendricks almost face planting into first base yesterday after his base knock.
No, it's
Woo,
really interesting.
Big sweat moment.
Yeah, he's like a really, really good athlete. When I was at spring training last year, I got to do, instructs and then go straight into, I had 3 days of like formal minor league spring training before the world got shut down and, NBA started pulling players off the court and stuff. And every morning I would walk in there for early work, and there's Kyle Hendricks by himself in a cage with a machine turned on, hitting. Just trying to get better at hitting.
Oh.
And I'm just like, and he rakes, like the guy just rakes off a machine. You're like, what a tremendous athlete. Like, they're all aliens up at the major league level, minor league level. They're all just like freak athletes, but it's just really fun to watch. Like I that struck a chord with me, is like, that is how obsessed these guys are with getting better, that a pitcher is in the cage doing his early work, trying to get better at hitting. To hit once every 5 days. I just thought that was pretty awesome. So
genuinely curious now what he thought of the DH then a few months later being implemented in the National League. Beth, your career, I mean, it seems like you've already done it all. Is there anything left that you really want to achieve?
Are you calling me old? Is that what that was?
No, I'm just calling you seasoned. How about that?
I do. I have added the glasses this year. I will admit to that. There's always something to strive for. And I think that's a big reason for all of us, being able to be successful at this. And I'm proud of the longevity and the versatility that it takes. I think, something that Rachel just spoke of, maybe there is a pivot in a few years to something different or a different position group. But, I haven't called a World Series. I haven't called a Super Bowl. I haven't called a football game at Notre Dame Stadium, this close to St. Patrick's Day in a big Irish Catholic family. That's still on the wish list. And I have not yet, I've attended a Chelsea match in the Premier League, but I have not called one yet. So that's way out there that someday may be able to come to fruition. You got to still reach for the stars, right? You got to dream big.
Absolutely. Soccer was my sport, so I would love to call soccer. I mean, maybe we can do a World Cup together. We'll dream big.
Little Champions
Who says
League?
no? Exactly. Deb, what about for you? I mean, I'm interested as to where you think the industry is moving technically this past year. It seems like they've made leaps and bounds. Just the fact that we're even broadcasting from home. What are some goals personally, and then where you would like to see the industry go?
Well, I think, for me personally, it's to Rachel's point, I haven't seen a full season here yet with the Cubs, so that is for me just so exciting to be here and to be part of Wrigley, and to be part of this launch of Marquee, which has been, tremendous, a tremendous experience. Launching a network, I think, was something I've always wanted to do. And it was just a tremendous thing to be part of, with an incredibly talented and dedicated group of people that I'm really honored to be working with. And I think, we've in the last, we've built an IP-based facility. We continue to learn about that technology and where it can take us, and the flexibility that we will have, within our broadcasts because of it. So I am very interested to see where that goes. But I also think, that this remote technology that we've all been part of in the last, a year now, is going to continue, and it will take on many different lives, I think, as our events get bigger and as we continue to have to socially distance and deal with the realities of the pandemic. And I think that technology is our friend in all of that, in the sense that it gives us the opportunity to continue to do what we love, and continue to bring the fans the games the way that we know how, and tell the stories that we want to tell through the technology that we're able to use and incorporate. I'm just working with some of the smartest engineers I've ever worked with in my career, and they continue to push the envelope and help us get to the place that we need to for our broadcasts. And I think Marquee will flourish as a result.
I can't wait. It's exciting to think about the future and some of the changes, and we're glad to have you leading the charge on that, Deb. But Beth, Rachel, thank you so much for this. This was so much fun. I love hearing about your stories, and I can't wait to see what all of you guys achieve in the coming years. So appreciate it. It's been awesome, and look forward to all getting together in person one of these days.
Absolutely. Thanks, Taylor.
Yes.